Hey guys, it's me again. This is going to be I can't tell you the number of the lecture, but the lecture is meant to correspond with the class period which would transpire ordinarily assuming conventional circumstances apply, which of course they don't because we're relegated to YouTube due to the exigencies of COVID. But if in fact that were not the case, and we were doing this class under normative circumstances, this would be the class which would be a week from the 28th of September, which I should have looked at the date, guys. I'm sorry. I think it's probably like the 4th of October or something, but it's the Monday. It's the Monday after it's the class period after your guys' exam is due. Okay, let's just put it that way. So your guys' test is actually not due on a class day. I think your guys' test is due on a Thursday, and ostensibly this class is a Monday and Wednesday class, but it's the Monday class of the following Monday, right? The class on the Monday following the week of the exam. Okay, that's maybe that's the better way to explain it. And I'll try to set this up in the language below the actual video, or send some sort of introductory commentary incidental to the email that I send out, which will have this as an attachment, so you won't know. So you will know rather what we're talking about or where this is situated relative to the overall schema of the course, and be able to contextualize it better. I should make a few perfunctory introductory remarks before I actually get into the substance of what we're supposed to be talking about today. First of all, as you can see from the rather regal environments that I find myself in here, the kingly, stately environment that I find myself in. I'm back in Detroit. Okay, this single room here that I'm recording this in is probably worth more than the entire value of the home that I was previously recording videos in. Just to put things into perspective, and I'm sure it probably looks as though it's worth many more times than the house that I was previously recording lectures in. Not that any of you really care, and not that that's really significant, but I thought I'd just mention that as an interesting fact. I will tell you what I told my political science group, and I will just reinforce what I know you've heard me say already, but it bears repeating, and it needs to be reiterated consistently and as constantly as possible because people still aren't taking it seriously. So today, the 28th of September, 29th of September, our governor had the occasion of visiting Houghton, the city of Houghton, Michigan. Maybe you were aware of this, maybe you were not aware of this. But the reason the governor came all the way up from Lansing, the capital, to visit our quaint little town should be self-evident for those who are not aware of this. And the reason is the same reason why I've been saying that COVID is a concern, most conspicuously for all of us living around in and around Michigan Tech. But it's a concern because people in this area are still not taking it seriously. Now, whether or not you're taking it seriously, I don't know. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt and assume that you are, because you're smart and that's why you're in college and that's why you do a lot of things that you do. But if you're not taking it seriously, then I admonish you to do so immediately. And if you value, this is a point that I made before, but I'll make it now again. If you value the interpersonal dynamic, which we do not have by virtue of this particular instructional modality, if you value directly physically interfacing with yours truly, which I don't particularly care. I'm indifferent to the modality of instruction because, as you guys know, my girlfriend is down here. All my homies are in Detroit. I mean, I'm fine staying here. I don't really care. Okay, I'm fine coming back there too. I can do either way. I actually I think it's easier to teach when I'm in class in person with you guys. It's hard to actually talk to a laptop, and I'm alone in this big house. Not that it's scary for me. It's strange. It's awkward. It's disconcerting in some ways. So I don't like having to talk to myself for any time at all, but especially not for an hour and a half, which this video is probably going to take it around there. So for that reason alone, I guess I could say that I'm on board with the whole proposition of going back and returning to class as it ought to have been. But alas, things don't always work out the way that we had hoped or expected, and as such, we find ourselves in a bit of a quagmire. I don't think this situation is going to resolve itself anytime in the next couple of weeks. I strongly suspect that we will be on a hiatus, an extended hiatus, until probably, honestly, the end of the semester. They may say, well, we're extending this 2 week period for another 2 weeks. They may phrase it in that language, but I think what's going to invariably happen is we're not going to see each other, well, at all, actually, unless some of you want to come down to Detroit and pay me a visit and hang out with this in this magnificent house. And I got an epic movie theater in the basement, home theater, and I got Nintendo 64, and I got PlayStation, I got Xbox, and I got all the great games down there, so we could have an amazing time down here. But that wouldn't really be much of an academic exercise, more like extracurricular activity. So I wouldn't recommend doing that because I don't think it's really worth the trip. Even if you did come down here, we got some gaming in. Suffice it to say, I think that we are all in this for the long haul. But again, I could be wrong. All right, I'm just going to make a prediction. I'm usually not in the prophesizing business, but that's my prediction. We'll see. Maybe I'll be proved wrong in 11 days from now. Who knows? But suffice it to say, please, if you're not doing this yet, when you go out to public places and public spaces, please be conscientious, not just for your own sake, but for the sake of everybody around you. And we all know that the larger Houghton metropolitan area has a very large geriatric population there that is endemic to that area. And if this spreads amongst that population, the results could be catastrophic because they have many pre-existing conditions, in addition to the fact that they're over the age of 80 or 90 in some cases. So I would strongly encourage you to take this seriously if you haven't been doing so already. And this is the end of my public service announcement. But that's why the governor was there today, to emphasize and to personally accentuate the need for adhering to proper pandemic protocols, because obviously this is something that many people are completely indifferent to. From a political standpoint, because in addition to teaching this class, I also teach political science and some other things. I would say that was actually a very bad idea for her to do that, because many people who live in our area, and by our area I mean Houghton County, not Bloomfield Hills here where I'm at, are contemptuous of everything that the governor represents, and because they have nothing but contempt and disdain for her, they're not going to take her seriously. In fact, they're going to do exactly exactly the opposite of what she's recommending them to do, just out of spite for somebody who they have a great deal of scorn for. So the only way you're going to change things up there is if Donald Trump gets in front of the television and says, people of Houghton County, start wearing masks and do it and take it seriously. And until such time as he does, and he won't because it's not politically expedient for him to do so, then things aren't going to change anytime soon. So that's my 2 cents. I know you certainly asked for it, so there you have it. And I know you really don't care, but there you go. And this is a way to just burn up time, because I'm going to do you guys a favor, right? I'm going to help you out. I'm going to hook you all up, and I'm going to hook myself up simultaneously while doing this. I don't want to make this any longer or more tedious than it absolutely has to be, so I'm going to try to consolidate this into about an hour and a half. Tonight, actually, incidentally, happens to be the first presidential debate between old fighting Joe Biden and Donald the champ Trump. I think they should just have a wrestling match to figure out who wins, and the election, to the winner go to the spoils. I think it would be probably more interesting, but anyways, tonight's that, and that's why I want to try to wrap this up before 9 o'clock Eastern time, which is probably not going to happen because it's already 8 o'clock. So what I want to do is you guys will hopefully be familiar with, maybe not nostalgic for, but familiar with the formatting of this particular type of video. And by type of video, I mean in reference to my surroundings and the way I do things when I'm in this particular office. It's a little bit different than the formatting of the video when I was sitting behind that desk and I had those excellent historical flags representative of the various warring factions during the Crusades behind me, because I'm not actually sitting at a desk. I may go over there and sit down a little while because I may get tired, but I'm standing here and I don't have my laptop because I'm using my laptop to record myself, and I'm on my desktop because that's my gaming machine and it's upstairs in the gaming command center. As such, I'm relegated to the old-fashioned, the oldest fashion style of slides, which are print-offs from my printer. And so, not that you guys really care, and not this is really essential, but that's where we're at. Okay, and I can't tell you what slide that actually is. I know it's the last slide that the slide subsequent to the slide that I was last talking about in the previous YouTube video. So wherever I think it's slide number 14 on the whatever slideshow we're on, number 3, or I think it's number 3. So that's where we're at. I'm not going to address any of my comments to the test yet. I'm not going to do a post-mortem autopsy on the test yet, because the results the jury is still out, so to speak, right? Today's Tuesday. All right, today's Tuesday, the 29th of September. Your guys' test is not due to me until Thursday, okay? If you're listening to this video sometime during this particular week, you don't feel as though it's incumbent upon you to actually listen to this and hear what I have to say, because none of what I'm going to say right now has any functional bearing on your taking the test. This doesn't, none of this material relates to the subject of the test itself, the substance and the subject of the test itself. The test concerns stuff that came before this point, and the only cumulative evaluation you're going to experience, if in fact we ever get around to it, is going to be the final exam. Okay, so that may be inclusive of material that wasn't particularized to that test exactly. But as far as this stuff is concerned, it is incongruous with the test that you are currently, hopefully, preparing yourselves to diligently take. Or if you're not that, you're actually probably, hopefully, in the process of actually taking it. So that's that. I will, when the test is done, okay, when you guys have returned the test to me, I'm going to go through and I'm going to give you very extensive feedback. And the reason I think I already qualified my feedback process, but I'll say it again because I can't remember what I said to you guys versus what I said to the political science people. But for you, for just for the record, and for all students, regardless of what class they happen to be enrolled in, and if they're taking it with me, I try to give you guys as extensive and comprehensive a sort of feedback as I possibly can. The quality and the character of my feedback is such that it's very extensive and it's very elaborate, and I don't do that to show you just how the orders of magnitude greater my own knowledge is than yours, right? Or to be condescending or denigrate you in any way. I do that so as to provide you with insights and to inform your perspective so that you may benefit from my analysis of your analysis, if you will, right? And I should stop calling it an autopsy or a post-mortem. Let's just call it a post hoc analytical assessment of your performance in the context of the exam. And when I give that feedback, right, it's going to be in red font, okay, because it's going to be in type format on the Word document. But again, my purpose is to help you, right? I'm going to try to help you to help yourself, right? Make you a better test taker, make you a more proficient answerer of essay questions, more analytical, more scrupulous, more comprehensive, more able to anticipate precisely what the question is asking and be more on point and precise and concise with your answer, and all the sorts of things that are associated with formulating a proper response in the context of an essay test. That's what I aspire to do. Whether or not I do that, I don't know, but hopefully I do, and you see that and you appreciate that. But what I'm not doing when I give you your test back and you get a whole bunch of red ink, red font type on there, don't think to yourself, oh, Jeff is just doing this because he's a shady, scandalous douchebag, and he's trying to show off how smart. No, I'm not doing that. No, absolutely not. And I'm not doing it just to be critical of you, right? I'm actually not a critical individual. I'm critical of myself. And I have to be critical of you guys to the extent that my job requires me to. But beyond that, I'm not ordinarily innately a critical person. So that's why I do what I do. That's the rhyme and the reason, the methodology. And if you got any questions about that or problems with it, please avail yourself of my phone number. And by the way, guys, whoever it is that texts me, somebody's been sending me text messages. Maybe it's just a random 906 number. It has nothing to do with any of you, but and they don't come across on my phone because it's a flip phone and it can't render a lot of the stuff, the emoticons that you guys use on the next generation of iPhones or whatever you're using. Stop doing that. All right. If you want to get a hold of me, okay, I've said this before. All right, I think I've been explicit about this, but if you really need to get a hold of me, please call me or email me. Okay. Texting is the last resort. It's the worst option, all right, because it's very, very difficult for me to text on my phone. My phone is going to be actually rendered non-functional probably sometime in the next couple of months. I got a message from Verizon saying that this device is no longer to be supported, and that means, well, you know what that means. So, anyways, without further delay, I have some questions that I want to dispense with, and the questions, and I hope you guys pardon the movement. I mean, this is it's a big office, a big room, plenty of room to stretch out and roam around in here. And I may be availing myself of the room back here. So hopefully it's not too distracting or incongruous with this simulacrum of an academic setting. But you know what? This is the best we can do in the circumstances. So let's just embrace it and to hell with it and let's roll with it. So what I'm going to do for you though is what I want to do, and I would be doing this in class with all of you sitting on the edge of your seat whether you called on. In fact, you were there. No, because I don't actually call on people. And even if I did, I'd probably end up answering the questions myself. But these are actually not my questions. These are questions from the book. So for those of you who have not gotten around to buying the book, don't worry about it. Because as you know, I don't want to say I don't care whether or not you have the book, but I don't think it's a matter of grave consequence. And I know I've explained my position and I've articulated the reasons as to why I think that is the case. And I'm not going to do that again. But suffice it to say, I know some of you guys don't have the book, and that's fine. And the reason that's fine is because I have the book, and I'm going to read from the book all the essential items of text that actually relate materially to the questions I'm going to be asking. And in this particular context, there is no text that really functionally relates to these questions because we've already talked about this stuff. It wasn't in the text. It was just stuff that I happened to cover in the scope of my monologue in one of the lectures, I think two or I don't know, probably last week or something. So these questions, though, for those of you who do have the book, these questions, you can find these questions on page 59, okay? Page 59 of the book. And the heading of this page is titled, it says mapping the rise of civilizations. Okay, mapping the rise of civilizations. And then the authors here have a couple of paragraphs, and it just says the earliest human civilizations arose in regions with substantial similarities in terms of the topography, the contours, and the configuration of the land, and other geographic features as well. The maps below depict how, well, you know, I'm not going to read this because this is all actually redundant. It's rendered superfluous by virtue of my already saying this stuff in the context of one of the lectures before this, not one of the YouTube lectures, one of the actual physical lectures. And I've elucidated this much more thoroughly than the authors are going to do in these two paragraphs. So I'm not going to bother wasting your time or mine. And I'll just go ahead and throw the questions out here. So question number one, okay, get ready for it. Are you ready for it? I don't know if I'm ready for it. Maybe I got to pause a little while. Let's build it up. Let's build up the anxiety here, the drama. Question number one. What key physical features are shared by the areas where civilizations first developed? What key physical features are shared by the areas where civilization first developed? All right, so this is one of those things where I wasn't actually aware of this when I set myself about configuring the PowerPoint slides in the way that I did and coming up with these lectures, because I came up with these lectures before this book was published. I think this book is probably vintage 2014, I want to say. Yeah, okay, well, actually, well, maybe not, but anyways, I didn't use this book, all right? But it just so happens that what the book is saying actually sort of neatly and rather succinctly is supplementary or complementary to much of what I've said already about this particular topic. So remembering back when we talked about ancient Egypt, we talked about the geography of the region. We talked about the topography of the region. We talked about the ecology of the region. We talked about whether or not it was hospitable, whether or not it was conducive to exploiting it for purposes of growing civilization, and all the other things that are conducive or facilitative to trying to achieve a higher state of existence for a group of people. And we said that it was. Now, what did ancient Egypt have in common with ancient Mesopotamia? The land between the rivers, right? Mesopotamia, between the rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris, right? What was in common? What was shared in common between those places? Well, and furthermore, because the book actually sort of draws, I guess, well, it draws explicit reference to this because it's got a picture of the Indian subcontinent here. What did these places have in common with India? Okay, with the Indian subcontinent. Well, I would say first of all, the ecology of the region was favorable to the growth and proliferation of large-scale agricultural production, right? Because that's the basic building block for any society. Assuming that you move past the guys running around in the woods with loincloth chasing after Simba or whoever it is, the hunter-gatherers, right? You're not in that stage anymore, right? You're more evolved and you're more advanced, and you want to support and sustain and enable the growth of a large population. And in order to do that, you have to be more than just a subsistence level of production with respect to your agricultural output. Now, the best way to do that is to find a region or an area of the world which is supportive, facilitative of large-scale crop production. And I would submit that the best way to do that is to find a river which enables you to control the flow, redirect or misdirect, artificially, unnaturally redirect the flow of the river so as to irrigate your crops. Now, irrigation is absolutely instrumental in enabling large-scale agricultural production, without which you wouldn't be able to do that. Unless, of course, remember, there's an exception to this, right? Unless, of course, you're living in ancient India and you're a constituent member of the Harappan civilization, right? Because the Harappans actually, interestingly enough, did not need to develop irrigation. Now, there's an old saying, okay, and I can't remember who came up with it first. It doesn't really matter, but it says necessity is the mother of invention, right? Necessity is the mother of invention. What that means is things don't get invented unless there's a need which compels the inventor to actually think outside of the box to the extent that he or she envisions this thing that hadn't been conceived of before. Now, I submit to you that necessity is the mother of invention in the context of the Nile River Valley in Egypt, right? Because we need to learn how to control the flow of the river and redirect it in a way so as to enable and facilitate the growth of our crops, right? So irrigation was born out as a consequence of the need to redirect that river and therefore channel it and ensure that the crops are actually being watered properly by a freshwater source. Same applies in the context of ancient Mesopotamia. Same applies in the context of ancient Rome. Same applies in the context of, I mean, you just go around the world and you list off these various ancient civilizations, and it is generally true to say that these civilizations, the reason they achieved irrigation, the thing that enabled them to achieve a mastery over this tempestuous and volatile and vicissitudinous river, whether it be the Tigris or the Euphrates or the Tiber or the Nile, which was very volatile, right? Whatever it was, the thing that enabled them to achieve that was the need, the compelling need, right? They had to in order to be able to grow sufficient crops to be able to sustain and support a large population. Now, that wasn't the case in the context of ancient India. Now, why wasn't the case? Well, because there was never the need for that, because the monsoons were sufficient so as to ensure that a large amount of rain, the precipitation was very heavily, and that precipitation was enough to sustain and support the population independent of modulating the flow of some river. Okay, so again, necessity is the mother of all invention. But if there is no need, then there shall not be the invention which flows from and is a consequence of the need, the incipient need, which compels that invention in the first place. Okay, so that's a little bit too philosophical, perhaps. But that's how I think about this question, all right? And maybe that's a rather contrived way of answering it, but I like nuance. Okay, I like subtlety and I like nuance, and that's what college is all about. It's about subtlety. It's not about, well, it's the mountains were there, and so they couldn't grow crop. Well, I can teach a chimpanzee. I can teach Mr. Bigglesworth to say that. All right. I want you guys to think. There's a reason we're called Homo sapiens, right? Because we're alike and because we're sapient. We think. Okay. Question number 2. These aren't numbered, so I'll just go down sequentially. Which of these are critical for the development of sedentary agriculture in each civilization? So it's asking which physical features. It's which of these is in reference back to the operative language of the first question. Well, I would say which of these is critical for sedentary agriculture. I would say well that's a stupid that's a redundant question because I already answered that. The rivers, all right, the rivers, stupid. Okay, it should be on my shirt, right? It's the rivers, dummy. The rivers, and in the context of the ancient hairpins and ancient Indian subcontinent, it was obviously the monsoons, right, which provided that which the rivers would have otherwise enabled. Okay, number 3 sequentially, they're not numbered. What roles did the presence of large bodies of water in the form of for God's sakes, talk about redundancy. Okay, I swear I didn't plan this. All right, and I don't want to go here and just mock and insult the authors because I'm sure they're extremely erudite and very very intelligent people. But these questions just seem to be they belabor a point which I think has already been belabored long enough. But I'll go ahead and ask. It's for the benefit well, not really for the benefit of anyone, but for presumably the benefit of those who don't have a book. What roles did the presence of large bodies of water in the form of rivers or access to the sea play in the rise of and expansion of civilized centers and contacts with other civilized areas? Okay, actually, they went in a direction that I didn't think they were going to go with that. So now this is asking, I guess, a more comprehensive question, and the answer itself is this question lends itself to a more comprehensive analysis. They're not just saying, well, what do you need? Okay, what do you need to develop civilization, which I perceive and construe as what do you need to support population. They're saying what enabled the growth of these civilizations, right? Which is another thing. So the cultural growth, the economic growth, right? What facilitated that? Right, and what is the relationship between that growth and the bodies of water? Well, I would submit that look at Egypt. Okay, Egypt is an excellent illustration of this, and one of the reasons why I spent so much time talking about the ecology and the topography and the terrain, which is endemic to the Nile River Valley and the area surrounding it, is precisely because this is demonstrative of a larger point. And the point that it demonstrates is that it is absolutely integral in terms of anticipating the extent to which you will develop along a particular trajectory, right? Whether it'll be an accelerated sort of upward trajectory, which will lead to civilizational achievements, right? or you'll be at this sort of homeostasis, and you're not going to really be achieving very much in terms of cultural productions, in terms of language, in terms of intellectual advancements, in terms of technology, and all those sorts of things that we think of as being adjuncts of or ancillary to the development and the consummation of civilization. And so what demarcates, what differentiates between the, you guys are familiar with the curve, right? What's the flat curve, right? We all want to flatten the curve with respect to COVID, right? But what's the curve civilizationally? What is that curve contingent upon? Well, I would submit that the curve is contingent upon where you're situated in relation to bodies of water. Okay, and I think that's the point that the question is trying to elucidate here. And I would say that the best response to this is to say, I mean, anecdotally, anyways, illustratively, is that Egypt is the prime example. It's sort of the apotheosis of a place that was well situated vis-a-vis the terrain, the topography, the ecology, as well as the bodies of water. Look at where Egypt is in relation to the Mediterranean, right? And look at where Egypt is also concurrently in relation to the Nile River. It is optimally situated in relation to both of those bodies of water. The Nile, right, freshwater body of water, river that you can manipulate and modulate for your own purposes for growing and sustaining crops. And it is also ideally situated to the Mediterranean, not freshwater body of water. It's a sea. It's a small ocean. But why is that significant? Well, it's significant in the sense that when you're situated in relation to a ocean or a sea, that gives you access to that body of water, which enables you to promulgate trade with other nations and civilizations. And trade, as we know, is necessary to ensure that you develop a robust and resilient economy, which itself is a precondition to developing a robust and resilient state, which itself enables and facilitates the development of a large military, because as I think it may have been Cicero who said this, and correct me if I'm wrong for those armchair philosophers out there. And you can go out there and Google this, and unfortunately I don't have the access to Google right now because, as you guys know, I don't have an iPhone or a smartphone. But I think it was Cicero who said, Marcus Tullius Cicero, who said, the sinews of war are infinite money. Okay, the sinews of war are infinite money. I've said this phrase before. I throw a lot of quotes around in this class and indeed my political science class as well. But the sinews of war are infinite money. That makes the point, right? It underlies the point that I'm trying to make, which is to say that foundationally, if you think about that which creates an empire, right? That which is a prerequisite to an empire, right? You cannot have an empire unless you have a large military. You cannot have the large military unless you meet several prerequisites for that, right? You need to have a large, a viable agricultural base to be able to support and sustain a large population, because that enables you to recruit from amongst that population. And number two, you need to have sufficient funds, okay? You need to be financially solvent imperially, right? In terms of your treasury, your government, right? You have enough money to throw around at your new recruits to be able to pay them and to train them and to provide them with the necessary military mercantile hardware to be able to go out there and fight a war in a serviceable condition. So again, the sinews of war are infinite money, right? Now, the richer you are, the better off you're going to be in relation to technology, in relation to training, in relation to manpower, in relation to your ability to project your power. And therefore, the more efficiently and efficaciously you can consummate that power and advance your imperial ambitions. So, what is the point? The point, therefore, is that it's important to be situated in relation to the Mediterranean that enables you to exploit the trade and the commerce and all the riches that abound from engaging in commercial interactions with other people who are situated around similarly situated around the Mediterranean, as are you. That's the point. If I made that ponderously enough for you. Number 4, what impact did geographical factors and interactions within nomadic peoples have on the long-term persistence or the disappearance of civilized life in these different areas? So it's talking about differential cultural impacts, I think, is what the authors are getting at. That's what I call it. I mean, you can call it, I just came up with that right now. But differential cultural impact, you could say, is just another fancy way of saying the extent to which outside influence, outside forces rather, outside migratory forces, they could be nomadic migrations, they could be the Indo-Aryans that we talked about. I mean, that's one example. But in general, nomadic peoples, migratory peoples who tend to move around a lot, right? What is the influence that those people have when they begin to interface and integrate with a local indigenous population that's been living there for God knows how long? Well, I would submit that the illustration of this that is, I think, perhaps most salient would be in the context of northern India. because you had the indigenous Dravidian people that were living there, and they were sort of the successors and the inheritors of the Harappan legacy. And then you had the Indo-Aryans come in there, and the Indo-Aryans did what with those people? Well, they intermarried, they interbred, they produced a new generation of people who embraced both of those cultures, and they sort of synthesized and they amalgamated and they assimilated, right? And that's the proper term. They assimilated, right? Or what I like to refer to, because I'm a part-time astronomer, it's a hobby horse of mine in addition to other things. In astrophysical terms, it's known as accretion, okay, the accretion of matter. And for those of you who remember this, I had this image of a binary star system where one star was a big gas giant, and it had a lot of light elements on it, helium and things like that. And the elements were being siphoned off by its counterpart, which was a supermassive black hole or a neutron star, ultramassive star. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to make, though, is that when the Indo-Aryans came into northern India, they began to intermingle and interface with the indigenous Dravidians, and they began to impart elements of their culture on those people, as did the Dravidians on the Indo-Aryans, right? So it's a quid pro quo. There's an exchange going on, right? It's kind of like the Great American Experiment, if you will. This is the melting pot, proverbially speaking, or at least it used to be. Right now, it's something else, right? We refer to it in derogatory terms because we think that that's something that should be excised from our nation's history because it's subject to the whims of partisan ideologues. But I think that it's important to understand that the extent to which your culture develops along a particular line is going to be a function of whether or not you're interfacing with other people. And think about this in relation to China. We're going to go back to China in about 30 seconds here. When I introduced the topic of China, one of the things that I said is look at the geography, look at the topography, look at the terrain, look at the ecology of what is now the nation of China. What was then just the land that the people who happen to speak that language inhabited. But it is such that it is conducive to extreme isolation in the sense that you're surrounded by the mountains of the Himalayas. And it's a very, very large place, and so you'd have to travel very, very far if you're a Mongolian or if you're somebody living on the other side of the Himalayas. You're in modern Turkmenistan or Tajikistan or Afghanistan or wherever you are. It's not very likely that the Chinese are going to experience much in the way of interfacing with people whose cultures are different than their own. And therefore, you see a developmental trajectory in terms of the culture and the society and the people themselves, which leads to isolation. Right, which creates I would say, a very xenophobic culture, which is resistant to change, and a very conservative culture indeed. One that is focused on retaining and maintaining the traditions of the past, because that is a part of an edifying legacy, and one which cannot be erased or effaced or in any way denigrated, because that's who the people are, and that's what the people remember, and that's what's important to them, because that's all they've known. And it encourages this idea of this sort of self-reinforcing sense of cultural superiority. Whereby, if you're living in northern India and you're exposed to these different migratory waves, you're experiencing this influx of Indo-Aryans, and you're experiencing this influx of Greeks because Alexander the Great is conquering you, and so on and so forth. And then you eventually got the Islamic conquest in the 7th century AD, and so on and so forth. And it continues, right? And you're intermingling and you're intermarrying, and the culture is, what is the culture doing at that point? Well, it's changing. It's subjecting itself to evolution, I would say. So to a form, I guess you could say it's progress. I don't want to say that has a positive connotation or negative connotation. It just means that it's progressing. Okay, now that is a very long and elaborate and perhaps unduly sophisticated answer to a question that may lend itself to a more intuitive and concise response. But there you have it. I don't think you can say that I didn't cover all our bases here. I mean, I've covered more than any of the bases that I thought I was going to cover. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about legalism, and this is going to be on, again, slide number 14, I think it is. It's got a picture of this guy it's a marble statue of a guy. It's not actually a guy. It's a marble statue, and the heading of the slide is ancient China, and the subheading is legalism. And we left off in discussing how the ideals of Confucianism, a philosophy that was promulgated by a man by the name of Confucius, hence the etymology of the name Confucianism, it inculcated its adherence in its disciplines with a particular sense of virtue. And the virtue of living a good life, as far as the Confucian preachments are concerned, is to go out there and to be caring and compassionate, altruistic and nice and generous and kind and gracious. And furthermore, Confucianism presupposes that humanity in general is generally inclined to be benign and beneficent and benevolent and good. And that people will, if given the opportunity, they will look out for others more so than for themselves. Now, I think that you would have to be an incredibly naive and idealistic, and I think rather young person to actually seriously subscribe to any of those notions, because I've been around this world for 40 years, which is probably 20 or 22 years longer than a lot of you who are listening to this. And I can tell you that in my experience, and I'm not saying that this is categorically true for all people at all times, but in my experience, that rather idealistic conception of humanity is at odds with, is incongruous with the nature of humanity itself. And but take that for what it's worth. Okay, that's just my personal commentary being interjected into otherwise an academic narrative. The reason I'm setting this up in the way that I am is because legalism is another philosophy. It was espoused by and promulgated by and originated with a guy by the name of Shang Yang. Shang Yang, and his name is on the slide, and you don't really know too much about him, but Shang Yang was the progenitor of legalist philosophy, and Shang Yang was sort of a legal scholar. He was also a philosopher, and he asserted that Confucianism and Confucius were in fact confused, pun intended. And the confusion arose incipiently from the initial presupposition that Confucianism makes, which is to say that people are good and people are altruistic and caring and passionate and noble and good and blah blah blah, right? And Shang Yang came along and he said, well, no, people are not good. People are actually inclined to seek and to serve their own selfish interests and to get away with whatever they can get away with to the extent that they're able. And people are nefarious and have contempt for others and are vicious and are brutish and are savage and are untamed animals essentially. And I don't subscribe to that conception of humanity in its entirety, but I would say that I'm more inclined to think that, right? And you don't have to be a nihilist, and you don't have to be the most cynical person in the world to admit that there's some prescience to that particular philosophical outlook, because in fact, well, I would say Shang Yang has been in many ways vindicated this last year. Look at the chaos in our United States right now. Look at the chaos, right? There is civil disorder. There is nearly insurrection in the streets of our major American cities. And you guys don't know this. Some of you probably don't know this because you haven't seen it yourself, but I have seen it myself because I'm about 20 minutes from the city of Detroit right now. And I could drive down there tonight and I'd be wearing my Nike emblems. And I'd probably take my old '79 Cutlass Supreme down there with some big fatty rims on it and the fuzzy dice. And I probably wouldn't be dragged out of my car because I was looking like I belonged. But if I go down there in a Rolls Royce, I'd probably end up getting shot and brutalized. Now, the point that I'm making here is that if you look at how chaotic our situation here is in the 21st century, and what I mean by his Shang Yang's philosophy, his philosophical outlook is being vindicated right now, is to say that when you have people fighting in the aisles of Walmart over toilet paper and Cheerios and Fruit Loops, right? Because there was actually a lot of combat going on over Fruit Loops. I saw that actually in the Houghton, the one on Razorback Drive there. Some guy tried to steal the last box of Fruit Loops from the aisle there in aisle 14 of our Walmart, and he had to grip it out of the hands of this other guy that was trying to take it simultaneously, and they almost fought over it. And I was glad that they didn't, because I was gonna have to just beat them both down for being so stupid. But thankfully for themselves, they didn't have to receive my beat down. But I think that humanity, if left to its own devices and without any mechanism for social control, does in fact devolve and degenerate into this what Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a famous French philosopher, referred to as a state of nature. Now, I'm not here to talk about philosophy, and I guess I've been expounding on philosophy too long. But I want to set this up so that you guys understand the argument, right? The argument of legalism is again, it's an argument which presupposes, right, the a priori assumption of legalism is only true if you assume before the promulgation of this legalist philosophy, that people are craven and despotic and degenerate and inclined to engage in all sorts of impetuous impulses that are modulated not by philosophy or by intelligence or by the mind or any rational calculus, but rather by instinct. If you assume all that, right, if that's the a priori assumption that you operate upon, well, then it makes sense to say that, therefore, the laws of the land must be very strict, must be very harsh, must be promulgated and enforced without mercy and without consideration to who they're impacting, who they're affecting. Law is The law is blind. Justice is blind, right? That is the fundamental assertion of legalism, that justice fundamentally is blind, right? Now, furthermore, legalism asserts that it is incumbent upon the legalist philosopher or the legalist ruler who decides to embrace legalism. It is incumbent upon that person to ensure that the law is properly disseminated to the people, that the people understand the law. And we do a great deal to promote the understanding of the law, and we do a great deal to ensure that the law is advertised very conspicuously and explained very explicitly, so that people don't have any ambiguity concerning what is expected of them on behalf of the state. And so it's not like here in the United States, where you'd have to be a law school graduate, or at least one who's attended law school for a couple of years and maybe never graduated, but you'd have to know quite a lot about the law to really understand what the law truly is. Right? Now the United States presupposes, it presumes that you have knowledge of the law. Whether or not you actually in fact did, it doesn't matter, okay? Because ignorance of the law is no defense, is no excuse to breaking the law. You can't claim that as a defense. That's not an affirmative defense, not a defense of any sort. Right? Now legalism, the legalist philosophers would have a problem with the speed limit posting signage on US 2 and US 117 up there in the Upper Peninsula. I made this anecdotal illustration before. I think I told you guys about this. I'm not going to say anything that's self-incriminatory here on record, but I will just say that I had a personal problem with the fact that the speed limit between US 2 going out of Marquette and along the scenic stretch there, and then on 117 was variable. And there's no conspicuous signage that advertises the fact that there's a variation, a 10-mile-an-hour departure southwards between US 2 and 117. Nothing is there to apprise you of that fact, right? So you just, you're going along at 65 miles an hour or however fast you're going, right? And you just assume that there's a continuation of that speed limit, right? Until such time as you encounter a 55 marker, right? Well, until there's a 55 marker, and as far as I'm concerned, as far as I think the law should be concerned, well, the speed limit is ipso facto at 65, right? Because otherwise you can't be presumed to know what the speed limit is at all times in all places unless you've got some profoundly advanced technology on board your latest your Lincoln Navigator or whatever you're driving around, and it tells you what the speed limit is on any given road. But if you don't have that, you're not going to know. But again, ignorance of the law is no defense, right? It's no excuse, right? Now legalism, the legalist philosophers and scholars and rulers would have a problem with that. They would say, well, you know what, you in Alger County, or you in the northwestern tiers of Mackinac County, as you enter the county there, you have no regard for the constituent citizens who are living in this place, because you haven't properly promulgated and advertised in a sufficiently conspicuous manner what the speed limit actually is, okay? Now, the reason the dissemination of the law is so important is so that, therefore, nobody can retrospectively say, in a legalist environment, a legalist paradigm, nobody can, ostensibly, right, in theory anyways, nobody can ostensibly say, well, I'm sorry, Your Honor, Magistrate, sir, right, I'm sorry, but I didn't know that was actually against the law, right? Nobody can say that, okay? And it's not as though, it's not remember, this is a distinction with the difference between the United States system, right? It's not like you can't say that because the law says that you can't say that, right? But in a legalist environment, in a legalist system, you can't say that because literally it would be counterfactual to say that, because everybody would know what the law is, because they actually educate you in the law. When you're going to school, you learn the law along with reading, writing, arithmetic, right? And so the law is so pervasively promulgated amongst the constituent citizens in ancient China, as we're talking about in this particular context, that everybody probably does know what the law is, okay? And there's really no justification to say that you didn't know what the law was, right? And so therefore, we can hold you to a very high standard of accountability when you break the law, right? You knew what the punishment, you knew what the crime was, you knew what the corresponding punishment was, and therefore, and you went ahead and you volitionally, of your own will, decided that you were going to go out there and you're going to do that crime, even though you had full knowledge of the fact that the state was going to hold you accountable for having committed that crime. It was going to impose this particular penalty upon you, right? And therefore, you can't say, well, Your Honor, I didn't realize the totality of my actions. I didn't realize the magnitude of the offense that no, you can't use that argument, right? And furthermore, you can't say that there were mitigating factors, right? Because if you are a legalist philosopher or an enforcer of the legalist principles, you assume that humanity is base and degenerate and disgusting and depraved. And therefore, humanity needs to be held accountable to laws which insulate all of us from the depredations of our fellow man, okay? That's the argument, right? So law needs to be enforced vigorously, mercilessly, and without any special dispensation or special consideration or any variance whatsoever. Now, can you conceive of this being a problem in the context of a monarchy or an aristocracy? That's the hypothetical, right? And it's not a hypothetical because it actually it becomes operationalized when we actually talk about the latter history of the the Qin dynasty, also known as the Shin dynasty. I think is how you pronounce it. And again, my ancient Chinese phonetics or my modern Chinese phonetics are obviously lacking in sufficiency. But what's the problem here? What's the problem when you look at the efficacy of legalism? You reconcile that with the operation of a monarchical system. Well, what's a monarchy? A monarchy says, essentially, it asserts, as a matter of fact, that the king is the supreme authority in the land. Well, what happens when Shang Yang comes along with his laws, his codification of law, and he says, well, actually, no, I got this parchment over here, and I got all these laws on here that I wrote, and the law, this is a nation of law. This is a nation of laws, right? We are a nation, and we are a people. We are a people who are all of us together, and no exemptions, no exceptions, no special dispensations. All of us are obligated to respect to and defer to and render ourselves accountable before the law at all times and in all places to all people, to all men. What's the problem? What's the problem? If you thought awkward silence was awkward when there was you and 14, 10 of you and one of me in the class, imagine how awkward it is when there's just one of me sitting in this room. The awkwardness increases by orders of magnitude. You guys know I have an aversion for silence of any sort, whether it's awkward or not, is inconsequential. So I guess I'll just have to go ahead and answer my own question. And this is the problem with YouTube videos, and we don't get the Skype interactions, but I don't think any of you guys care because you guys know I got to answer my questions anyway, even if you have me in the flesh in person. So I think the problem is that in a monarchy, you have a head of state who is supreme. He's answerable and accountable in theory only to the gods, right? Not answerable and accountable to any man, right? And therefore, right, following that logic, continuing along with that logical analysis there. Therefore, he the monarch, the king, the head of state, the emperor, whatever you want to call him, is not accountable to any rules that are promulgated or created by man. Okay, because if he's not accountable to man, how can he be accountable to something that man transcribed, right? It does not follow, right? It's a non sequitur to say that, well, he's not accountable to man, but he is accountable to the rules that are promulgated by man, right? So he's not accountable to either, right? That's a monarchy, right? And that's what we had when Shang Yang was living in ancient China. Now, what's the problem with that, right? Well, the problem becomes it's a matter of supremacy, okay? Who is what rather what or who? Okay, it's a combination between a what on one side and a who on the other, right? Who or what? Which of these things is supreme? Is it the king, who derives his authority, his power, his right to rule, his mandate from heaven? Remember the mandate of heaven? Remember the rhetoric of the whatever dynasty it was that came before these guys? I don't really care. I care more about themes and your capacity to understand these things than actual proper names. Who has greater power in this particular situation? The king, who derives his power and his authority and is authenticated in his rule by the gods, or the laws of man. The laws of man as they were promulgated and conceived of and transcribed by this guy Shang Yang. Okay, what is it? How are those two things, or those two theories, ruled by monarch, right? Divinely appointed or divinely sanctioned monarch until such time as he loses the mandate of heaven, then he becomes not divinely sanctioned anymore, right? Or the supremacy of law, right? Is there an irreconcilable conflict of interest that exists between these two things? Are they mutually exclusive? You can have one, but you can't have the other, right? You can have one, but you can't. Yes, that's the point. You can have one, but you can't have the other, right? Precisely right. I knew you guys were going to say that. For those of you who are already thinking of it, congrats, props, good job. My hat's off to you. The hat's coming back on because I'm going bald, and I don't want any of you guys to see that. What's the problem then? Well, the problem is Shang Yang's problem, okay? Because Shang Yang says all men are accountable to the law. Does this somewhat prefigure and anticipate in some ways, in some prescient ways, what Jefferson and Adams and Hancock, right, and the rest of the founding fathers said, right? That all men are created equal under the law. Well, yes, it does, right? But Shang Yang, you could say, was a man before his time, okay? Or you could say he was just a very cynical, nihilistic individual and he thought the worst about humanity and he got what was coming to him. Well, maybe you could say that too. Maybe both those things are both true about him. It's not that one or the other has to be true, but I submit that it seems to me that Shang Yang sort of overextended his authority and overreached his man, or exceeded his mandate as a legal scholar and as a legal philosopher and as a promulgator of this particular philosophy known as legalism. Because what he said, he insisted on fair, equitable, dispassionate enforcement of and accountability to his laws. So the future king, who at that time was just a duke, right, or a higher echelon noble, he's the son of the reigning king, or the previous ruler. The future king, actually, that's not true. He's not the son. It's not dynastic, and that's the reason why this ends up happening the way that it does. But he's a noble. He's a high-ranking noble. He's not the king. He's not related to the king. The future king, though, right, commits a crime, and Shang Yang has the impotence and the insolence and the arrogance and the audacity, mind you, and the testicular fortitude, if you will, to insist that the future king, this very powerful noble, right, who may very well conceivably occupy the throne one day, right, and therefore determine the fate of all men, including Shang Yang, because he's just a man, right? The future king is subjected to the punishments according to Shang Yang's law, because Shang Yang insists that no man, even the noble, right, is above the law. That all men are equally accountable before the law, and the law will be enforced with equal efficacy and without any special consideration or dispensation, regardless of who you are. Okay. Now, this noble, this high-ranking noble, who had the law enforced upon him and who was humiliated and debased as a result of it, because it essentially asserts that if you have this law enforced upon you, right, you're Shang Yang, you're enforcing this law upon people, right, it brings the king down. It brings him down to a level that is below, or that brings the noble down, because he's a noble at this time, brings him down to a level that is beneath his dignity, okay? And that is incredibly, profoundly insulting and demeaning for him. And now this noble becomes the king. And what happens? Do you think the king is going to forget or forgive? He will do neither. He will remember, and he will enact his vengeance, and he will have his revenge upon the ignominious Shang Yang, who he recalls as forcing him to submit himself under the laws of man. But remember, he's not any man. He's a noble, and then he becomes the king. And now he's getting back, right? This is the yin and the yang. This is reciprocity. This is doing to others as you would have done to yourself. Well, Shang Yang has done unto him, which actually he has a lot more done unto him than he had actually done to this noble who later becomes king. Shang Yang knows that the new king is out to get him. And Shang Yang decides to run away because he's kind of he knows that the king is going to get him, all right, and he wants to run away, and he tries to make his escape. He tries to make good his escape, but on the road out to China, he finds this inn, all right. There's an innkeeper there, and Shang Yang comes running to the inn and he says, "Oh, please, Mr. Jiang, or whoever your name is, right? Please take me in and provide me aid and comfort and hide me from the king's men who are trying to find me." And the innkeeper says, "I cannot. I'm going to have to throw you out on the street because you, Shang Yang, are a fugitive from justice. And according to the laws that you yourself promulgated, and that I know because we've been living under the tyrannical dictates of legalism for the last however many decades." And so when the innkeeper was a young man, ostensibly he was provided with a legalistic education, so he knows what the laws are, so he can conform to them. And Shang Yang comes running to his inn, the inn, and the innkeeper ironically says, "I cannot harbor you here. I cannot hide you here. You have to go back out on the road where you will invariably be caught by the king's men, and whatever will be subjected to you will happen." Right? Now the irony is that because it was the innkeeper did this thing because he was scrupulously adhering to, and obeying and deferring to the laws that Shang Yang himself made. Okay? Now, I know I've thrown this quote out there before, but I'm going to throw it again because it's actually relevant to what we're talking about. We are all authors of our own destiny. Okay? Remember that quote? Right? That wasn't Cicero. That was probably Aristotle. That might have been Ovid that actually said that. I can't remember. I think it was one of the Roman poets. But we are all authors of our own destiny. Right? We're masters of our future, essentially, assuming that we have free will. Well, is that not the case with old Mr. Shang Yang, in the sense that he was the one who wrote the law, and then later on down the line, the law has direct personal ramifications for him personally because it results in this innkeeper throwing him out on the street, when otherwise he could have hid there and probably made good his escape and got away. Well, as a result of being thrown back out on the road, right, Shang Yang is apprehended, he's caught, okay, and he's brought before a tribunal, which adjudicates punishment upon him, okay, which adjudicates his case. and it decides that because he had the audacity, or the insolence rather, to dare to insult a future king and a member of the ruling nobility, that the punishment most befitting of such an ignominious and despicable crime would be to be torn apart, torn limb from limb by chariots. To be torn apart, literally have your body torn asunder by chariots. Now just picture this, if you will. Okay. Ordinarily, I would act this out in full dramatic and theatrical effect if we were in fact in the classroom, but I can't do that because there's not enough. The view field of this monitor is too small, and I'm tired. So what you do is you lay spread eagle. You guys know what that means, right? Spread eagle. Okay, it's like the American eagle. Right, that's the best example. I mean, I could give other examples, but they'd be a little bit more salacious than that. But spread eagle, right? It's like this, right? You got your four limbs out towards the four cardinal directions. Well, actually, not the four cardinal. Northwest, northeast, southwest, southeast. That hurt. And what do you have? You have ropes tied to your wrists, and you have ropes tied to your ankles, and the ropes extend all the way to the back of a chariot. And there's the emperor, his magistrate, or whoever, right? And the command is given, you know, giddy up, or whatever they say. I don't know what they say. You know, go, commence fire. You know, and the chariot drivers, they take off, right? Get up, go, right? And the guy, the ropes are pulled taut, right? And Chang Yang's there, and he's got the ropes pulled taut, and then his arm gets ripped off, and he loses his arm. He's ah, and then his leg gets ripped off, and so on and so forth, right? You guys get the picture, right? Well, that was actually pretty dramatic, but not as dramatic as it would have otherwise been if we were actually in the classroom. I was in the classroom. So he's torn apart. Isn't it ironic, in the words of Alanis Morissette? Okay, isn't it ironic? Don't you think? It's a plane that you just can't take. Well, I'm not going to sing to you guys because I have a horrible voice, and I don't really like Alanis Morissette, and actually it was a very stupid song. But isn't it ironic that Shang Yang is meets his fate, meets his dastardly and horrific and torturous fate as a direct function of the laws which he himself had a hand in authoring, in promulgating, and whose enforcement he insisted upon. And well, what can you say? You know, you stand before the laws, right? All men are accountable before the laws, right? Including the man who makes the laws, evidently. Okay, so that's a lot for one slide, and I apologize for that, which means I'm gonna have to go through much more quickly the remainder of the slides because we've only got another half an hour left, and that was only one slide, and I think I got like 5 or 6 more slides left. Okay, what else? Let's talk about the Qin dynasty. Okay, also known as the Shin dynasty. Okay, it's pronounced, you say potato, I say potato, tomato, tomato. The Shin dynasty was, now here's the reason why I spent so much time on legalism, because we're going to come back to it right now. Okay, remember what I said about Confucianism. Confucianism wasn't just a personal philosophy that you could personally embrace on an individual level. It was also a philosophy that could be, I guess, extrapolated upwards to the level of the state, right? That a nation state could dictate its policies or modulate the way in which it interacted with the other nation states around the world, pursuant to and in accordance with the principles of Confucianism. Could you therefore theoretically have an ancient Chinese state which said, you know what, screw Confucius, all right? He was confused. He was an old, douchebag. And he was too idealistic, and he always assumed the best about humanity, and that's not true. Human beings are dastardly and nefarious and brutish and savage and instinctual and impulsive and impetuous and all those things. Shouldn't we rather say that legalism ought to guide the way in which our nation operates geopolitically, strategically, militarily, right? In terms of the overall geopolitical chess game, right, that we play, okay? Let's extrapolate legalism, the principles of the philosophy of legalism upwards, and let's allow that to regulate how we go about adjudicating matters that are of great significance for the state as a whole. Now, if you say that, and I submit to you that the Qin/Qin dynasty did, right? They did, and that's a matter of historical fact. Well, then it would seem to me to be the case that if in fact you embrace legalism as the means and the mode and the leitmotif and the zeitgeist, which is going to modulate your interactions with other governments and modulate the way in which you comport yourself as a state, you are going to be fantastically successful. Why is that the case? Well, remember I said Confucian thinking was essentially the antithesis of Machiavellian thinking? I think I said that in the last lecture. I hope I said that. If I didn't, I'm saying it right now, right? Well, Machiavelli, okay, Niccolò Machiavelli, we're not going to get to him because he was a 17th century Florentine philosopher. And he promulgated the idea that to go out there and to assume the worst about all people at all times is probably the best course of action you can take. Because if you get it right, all right, well, then you saved yourself the possibility of being stabbed in the back or stabbed in the face, depending on where the enemy is facing you, right? But if you get it wrong, well, then, some innocent douchebag just died. You kill that innocent person. So what? That's not your loss. That's your gain. You get one less stupid person in the world, right? That is a very crude and very crass, mind you, way of conceptualizing Machiavelli's philosophy, because it's much more nuanced and infinitely more complicated than that. And if you really want to get into it, go out there and read his seminal work, The Prince. I've read it several times. I can honestly say that. I'm not boasting. I actually have. Because I think that the most Machiavellian character in the universe of film and cinema is Darth Sidious. And for those of you who are fans of Star Wars, will know that he was sort of the penultimate bad antagonist throughout the course of most of those films. In fact, Ian McDermott, the guy who plays him, I think is the only actor who's actually been in all. I correct me if I'm wrong, but he's been in, I think, 7 films. I don't count the last 3 because they were raped by Disney. But going back to the point, if you say Confucianism is a really bad way to go about dictating your policies of state, because you're always assuming that people are nice and happy and generous and altruistic and reciprocal with respect to good deeds, right? If that's what you assume about nations and other states, what's the problem? Does that comport with what we know about what nations do? What do you do when you're dealing with a nation like North Korea or Iran, right, or Saudi Arabia, okay, or Israel for that matter, because they're a pariah. If ever there was a pariah nation, there's certainly Israel. And look at how much they're abusing the rights of the Palestinians, and they've gotten away with it with impunity for so many years now, right? If that doesn't rile you up, I don't know what will, right? Talk about violations of international law. They don't even have a right to exist under international law. But all those states, what do they have in common? They're all led by cynical men. All led by cynical men who are always assuming the worst about other people and always ensuring that they do the most to advance the interests of their own people. A nationalistic policy. Iran for Iranians, Germany for Germans, the America for Americans. You can see it doesn't extend very well to the United States because we have everybody in this country, and that's why Trump never says anything like that, right? Because it's self-defeating. But the point here is that if you go out there and you're a Confucian person and you're ruling an ancient Chinese state and you're a Confucian person and you embrace that philosophy in terms of how you modulate your interactions with the states, you're going to end up like Canada. Okay, why do I keep picking on Canada? Well, because it's fun and it's easy and it's kind of funny because South Park makes fun of them. Well, that's true, right? But Canadians are nice, right? They're very nice. They're very nice and they're very kind, and actually they're very good-looking people too. There's some very beautiful Canadians up there in Canada, men and females, right? Not that I'm interested in half of that, but just saying. Okay, for those of you who are interested, go across the border and go carouse and fraternize with our neighbors to the north. But besides the fact that they're really nice and they're very good looking, they tend to be too nice. Okay, they tend to be too altruistic, and they tend to assume. Go and watch. It was called Canadian Bacon. It was a movie with Chevy Chase and John Goodman back in the day. And they go up there and they're slapping the Canadians around and they're mocking them out, and the Canadians don't do anything. The Canadians just apologizing all the time, even though these guys are like running them off the road and I don't know, stealing things from them. But Shang Yang, all right, well, the philosophy of legalism is the antithesis of that, right? It says, assume that the enemy is plotting against us, right? And okay, this is actually a quote from, I believe this is a quote from Sun Tzu, okay? This is a quote from Sun Tzu, and it says, and Sun Tzu wrote the Art of War, which is sort of the magisterial work upon concerning military tactics, military strategies, how to go out there and defeat your enemies and destroy them and annihilate them. But he said, in the context of this particular philosophical military strategic book, he said, he who does not strike first, will be the first who is struck. Okay. Now I think that fundamentally encapsulates, very succinctly and concisely encapsulates the essence and the ethos, the spirit, if you will, the zeitgeist of legalism as it applies to how you ought to go about ruling your state and how you ought to go about interfacing with other countries, right? So assume the worst about those countries at all times, until such time as they prove themselves worthy of your trust, and even then assume that they're trying to insinuate themselves into your trust for their own maniacal reasons. The Godfather, right? Keep your enemies close. Keep your friends closer, your enemies closer. And if you apply the rules of legalism to ruling your state and to interfacing with other nations and other states, what that will enable you to do is always be on a constant war footing, to always be ready for the next invasion, to have already planned and anticipated because you know what's going to happen. It's inevitable, right? And it's now, especially think about this in the context of the history that we're talking about, right? And read the book if you want more clarification on the details. I don't care about the details, I care about the themes, right? But what we're talking about here is the Qin, or also known as the Qin dynasty, goes out there and they embrace the philosophy of legalism, and they operationalize that philosophy. And what they do is they're fighting against other regimes that are being modulated by Confucian ideals. Okay. And the leaders of these other states that are vying for control over ancient China, that are fighting against the Qin slash Qin, right? These other states are thorough Confucians through and through. They embrace Confucianism, okay? And that's their philosophy, and that's their outlook, and that's how they modulate their engagements with other people. So you have legalism, the Qin, right? And that's essentially embracing a strategy and a tactic and a paradigm which is analogous to the way in which Nazi Germany fought its wars. Okay, do your utmost to destroy and annihilate your enemy as quickly and as efficaciously as you possibly can manage, right? And you're fighting against the Canadians, right? Who's going to win in a mashup between Canada and Nazi Germany? Well, I'll leave that to your good judgment, but I think that unfortunately, for our hypothetical, the Canadians are going to lose, right? So that enables the fact that legalism is being embraced by the rulers of the state. It enables the Qin slash Shin, and this is just the way that you pronounce it, right? It looks like Qin. I should preface this all by saying the word looks like Qin. It's Q-U and then apostrophe I-N, but it's pronounced Chin or Chin. Okay, I don't really care. It doesn't matter. Who cares? What's ironic about all this? What's ironic about the fact that this Qin state embraces legalism, and the fact that they embrace legalism enables them to expand, enables them to conquer those other states, which are less effective at fighting wars because those other states are ruled by a bunch of Confucian philosophers who are always assuming the best about all the other people, including their enemies, and therefore being taken advantage of and being exploited and being destroyed by the legalist people. What's ironic about this? Think about from whence legalism came. Where did legalism originate from? With whom did legalism originate? See, the irony abounds in history. And where would we be without irony? Life wouldn't be worth living, perhaps, without irony. I mean, irony is what makes life worthwhile. It's the apotheosis of the intellectual life. I humbly submit to you, anyways, that the irony here is that the man who made legalism possible and therefore enabled the advancement and the achievements and the military and geopolitical growth of the Qin Shin dynasty, the man who enabled all that, the man who precipitated all that, was killed by that dynasty, was put to death by the man who ascended to become ruler of that kingdom, who then, subsequent to having Shang Yang executed, this ruler goes out there and embraces this philosophy and enables him to achieve even greater glory through his military conquest, through his cynical engagement with diplomacy with other nations, through his exploitation of the more Canadian people, right, etc. Right, and so I think that's an irony. Okay, it's a tremendous irony. All right, and that's part of what all this is about. So the other aspect that I should explicitly state here is that when you are a legalist, you don't allow your enemies to surrender. You give them no quarter. You kill all the prisoners of war. You just exterminate them all, and you don't concern yourself with being compassionate and being considerate and being fair and being just or even being equitable. It doesn't matter. It doesn't just do whatever you have to do to achieve victory in battle or in war. Whatever it is, whatever the conflict is, right? Do whatever is most expedient to your particular interest. Do that which is necessary. Okay, necessity dictates expediency. Right? That's the mantra of legalism, or one of the mantras, I guess you could say. And this goes back to a point that I think I made when I was talking about von Clausewitz a couple of weeks ago. I said von Clausewitz essentially would have agreed with legalism. He would have said, well, he actually did say, we don't have to theorize that he said this. He actually literally said, and this is sort of a less eloquent rendition, but he essentially said that the nation or the warring faction, which is most effectively able to divest itself of the civil conventions of civil society, the things that make us civilized, right? That faction is going to be the most efficient and the most effective at annihilating its adversaries. Right? That is least that faction, that warring nation, which is least restrained by the compassion and the consideration that are incidental to living our civil life. That which is capable of completely divesting itself of all the trappings of civilization and merely fighting the fight and doing whatever is necessary to ensure victory is obtained within that fight. That will be the victorious nation, or that will be the one which is least encumbered by notions of civility, right? And now Confucius is saying, go out there and treat your enemy generously. Go out there and take prisoners and treat them well and be kind to them, and et cetera, et cetera. All right, you guys get the point. All right, let's talk about the last ruler of the Qin dynasty, a guy by the name of Shi Huangdi. Okay, and I'm at the very bottom now of whatever this is. This is sequentially in terms of our sequence tonight. This is slide number 2. I think it's slide number 15 on the actual slides. This and the very, very bottom here, and it's got this guy's name here, and it says his name is Shi Huangdi. Okay, let's say just say Shi Huang, but his full name is Shi Huangdi. D-I, not D-I-E. Shi Huang was an incredibly ruthless ruler, and he was one who permitted nobody to challenge his rule, and he was one who absolutely assiduously enforced the mandate of legalism upon all of his people. And so there was no escape from the law under Shi Huangdi. Furthermore, there was no dissent, no philosophical dissent permitted. So philosophers who disagreed with the principal tenets of legalism, let's say, right? They say, well, legalism assumes the worst about people. Maybe that's not always true in all cases. Let's not assume that, right? So if you were a philosopher who advocated for a position that was distinct from the legalist, the hardcore, cynical, sort of, people are always bad position. If you were one of those philosophers and you were living in ancient China under the regime of the Shi, the Qin dynasty, and Shi Huangdi happened to be the ruler at that time, what he did was he rounded up all those scholars and those philosophers and those men of erudition and learning and intellectuals and such. He rounded them all up in a process known as the burning of the books and the burying of the scholars. The burning of the books and the burying of the scholars, and the burying of the philosophers. This sounds like, again, I like drawing parallels between what's happening in ancient China or Mesopotamia or Egypt or whatever to modern Germany, because that's what my area of specialization is. That's what I know a heck of a lot more about than any of this stuff. And I look at this and I say, this is like, if you guys remember that scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the last good Indiana Jones movie that they made before Spielberg raped that too. There was that scene where they go to Berlin, where Henry Jones, played by Sean Connery, and then Indiana, played by Harrison Ford, of course. They go to Berlin, and there's those guys marching around with goose stepping, and they have the nice tall leather boots, and they're all wearing the Nazi uniforms. And what are they doing? They're throwing books into the flame, right? They're having a little book burning party, right? That's what's happening under Shi Huangdi is, to my mind, evocative or reminiscent of what the Nazis did in the context of their own aversion for any ideas that challenged the prevailing thought of National Socialism, which was the ideology of Nazism. And so Shi Huangdi is essentially trying to do that. He's trying to enforce his mandate very ruthlessly, very categorically across the board, right, to ensure that there are no alternative opinions that arise, that don't take incipient form, right? Because how are ideas spread? Well, they're spread by talking, right? But they're also spread by the written word, okay? And if you have a codex, you have sort of a Bible, a philosophical Bible that you can turn to, this establishes what the rules of your philosophy happen to be. We have to burn those, right? Burn those and eradicate all forms of resistance to your particular way of thinking. Because the more those forms begin to spread, the more people begin to open their minds up and give consideration to alternative realities, if you will, alternative theories that explain the nature of humanity, that explain the nature of our existence, that explain the purpose of life, and also explain ways that we should go about interacting with each other that may be contradictory to the principles of legalism. And so therefore, it's incumbent upon the shrewd ruler, the diligent ruler and the one who wants to retain complete hegemonic power over his constituent serfs and subordinates and peasants and slaves, to ensure that he eradicates all vestiges of any sort of philosophical or intellectual ideas that are antithetical to his own philosophical rule. The philosophy which endorses and ratifies and authenticates his rule, which of course is legalism. Now you may say that legalism, maybe some of you haven't deduced this, but I'm just coming to this realization myself, and maybe it's a point that I should have made before. But going back to the incompatibility or incongruity or reconcilability between legalism and monarchism, right? How can you have this Shi Huangdi, who's the king, the emperor of ancient China, the Qin dynasty? How can you have him embracing legalism? But it's an amended form of legalism. Okay, it says all men shall be accountable before the laws and shall submit themselves before an equitable court, which will render the law and apply the law in a completely dispassionate manner, except for the king. Okay, and that's essentially the way that legalism has been revised or amended. All right, so there is that very significant caveat which exempts the king from the applications of these laws, which otherwise, without which he wouldn't be able to retain his rule. So Shi Huangdi is this very, very tyrannical autocrat. He has no tolerance for any deviation from his rule. And he's also known for the creation of what became known as the Terracotta Army. Okay, and you may have seen images of this, right? So they're like these mini, well, actually not miniature. They're life size. What am I talking about? They're life size statues of warriors. Some of them are infantry, some of them are cavalry, some of them are archers, right? Various different types of warriors in various different positions. Usually they're standing around like they're in military formation, and they're made of terracotta, which is kind of like a clay, okay, kind of like a pottery of sorts. And there's 8,000 of these guys, 8,000 individual personalized warriors, right, that have individual facial expressions, and they have, unique weapons and things like this. There's 8,000 of these basically these statues, these pottery-like statues that are in the tomb of Shi Huangdi, okay, his final resting place. And this tomb has been in the process of excavation, archaeological excavation, for many, many years now. And what the archaeologists and the anthropologists and the historians and whoever else are involved in this process have been able to discern is that the Shi Huangdi had this army created ostensibly so that when he's in the afterlife, when he goes up to heaven, because certainly he's going to go to heaven, even though he was killing people left and right and burying scholars and philosophers alive and burning all their books and doing all those sorts of draconian things, he's going to go to heaven because that's what the philosophy of ancient China said. And the idea of the Terracotta Army is that, well, when he's in heaven, these guys are going to basically go up there with him. All right. Now, if you guys know anything about the Norse sagas, or not the Norse sagas, but the Viking rituals, right? The rituals of the Norsemen. And you should, because you up there in the Keweenaw, not me, but you, are from Viking ancestry, or many of you are. Some of you, I'm sure, are not, right? But those who come from Finland and Norway and Scandinavia in general, you are derivative of a Nordic lineage, right? Which can trace it incipiently back to the Vikings, right? And before that. Well, one of the traditions the Vikings had was to bury warriors with their swords or with their other weapons, and with all the gold and the loot and all the things that they had acquired over the course of many, many years of campaigning against various adversaries. If you guys ever watched the movie Beowulf with Angelina Jolie and some other people, you'll remember at the very end of the movie, Beowulf, the character Beowulf, is actually, he's buried at sea in this boat. He's not buried on land, which is kind of strange because that's usually what they were doing. But he's buried at sea because they needed to move the plot along, and Angelina's character lived in the ocean, and she needed to fly up there and possess his spirit and some other nonsense. But they had a bunch of gold and jewelry and weapons and things with them. So that's kind of what Shi Huangdi was doing, right? The belief that whatever goes into your tomb, right, whatever is sealed off with you in that tomb, that hermetically sealed in that tomb, is somehow metaphysically conveyed to the realm of the afterlife, right? And that stuff or whatever is in there with you, whether it's material, whether it's dogs or men or whoever, right? All that goes with you into the ethereal realm that exists in heaven, whatever that was as far as the Chinese mind was concerned. And so Shi Huangdi is going up there with 8,000 warriors. So the idea is it's going to give him it confers upon him some degree of prestige, not just in life, but also in death. He shall be a ruler, right? He's going to go up there in heaven. He's going to have these 8,000 guys around with chariots and horses and things and cavalry and guys with swords and such. And he's going to be able to go and boss them around and give commands to them, right? So he's going to have this army to order around so he doesn't get bored, right? He's up there for eternity. Maybe he gets tired of eating egg rolls or whatever, right? Or reading fortune cookies or something, right? I'm trying to be funny, right? That's actually no, that's a pretty stupid joke. But what happens if he gets up there and he gets tired of all that, right? He just gets tired of sitting around and reading Confucian philosophy, for instance. Okay, I don't know what their conception of heaven is, but I'm sure it was pretty boring, right? Well, now he's got 8,000 guys up there, so he can have little mini battles and things. He can play Total War for real. Okay, that's a video game franchise. If you don't know that yet, go and check it out. It's worth checking out. All right. Lastly, well, second to lastly, possibly third to last, depending on how quickly I get through this. Shi Huangdai eventually ends up dying. Okay, as is the fate of all of us, and he dies while he's on this grand tour of his realm. Okay, and the realm of the Qin, the Qin dynasty, was very, very, very large, very, very extensive. And unfortunately for Shi Huangdai and his entourage, he dies while he's many, many, many miles away from his capital. I don't know how many miles, a lot, right? Far, okay, like from where you guys are at down to where I'm at, all right, from Houghton to Detroit, all right, that like that, okay. And he's traveling around with his entourage. He dies, okay. Now, when he dies, he's surrounded by soldiers, by bodyguards, and he's surrounded by advisors. And the two chief advisors, these two chief ministers, are the only ones who actually become aware of the fact that he's dead. Because when you were the emperor of ancient China in the Qin dynasty, you were considered to be so holy and so revered that only certain men of certain rank could actually directly interface with you. Okay, especially when you were traveling around the country. And they had like this, I guess it's referred to as a litter, but it's basically like a bed that's mobile, and you got these slaves, these handlers, these soldiers that carry this bed around. Okay, and it's fully enclosed. It's like one of those big canopy beds that you guys have seen, right? Maybe you've seen them in movies, okay? But there's like a canopy bed, right? It's got like a covering on the top of it so the rain doesn't come in, and then it's got like these drapes, these curtains that surround the whole thing, right? And then there's this really nice lavish bed, and there's a pillow in there, and it's all silk, and Shi Huangdai is in there, and this thing is being carried around, right? It's on like these rails, okay? And this whole bed apparatus is being carried around by these guys. They're slaves or they're soldiers, whatever they. And the ministers would go up and they would open the curtain up and they'd look in there and they'd be, oh, master, your reverence, your majesty, give us the orders for the day. And then Shi Huangdai would say, well, we're going to go up in the mountains today or whatever we're going to do. We're going to go inspect that city. And so one day the ministers, they pull back the curtain and they look in there, and Shi Huangdai looks like he's asleep. And then they say, oh, your majesty, your highness, your worshipfulness, wake up, sir. It's 10 a.m. in the morning. It's time for us to receive our orders. And he doesn't wake up, and they realize he's dead. What do? They close the curtains and they pretend. They pretend. They engage in a game of imagination, right? They engage in a game of make believe, right? And these two chief ministers pretend that Shi Huangdai actually hasn't died and he's still alive and he's still just in that mobile bed they're carting around in. And so they begin to make up a bunch of orders, right? Fake orders, okay, that ostensibly came from Shi Huangdai. And these fake orders are meant to ensure that these two chief ministers, these guys, the only two guys that know that the emperor is actually dead, that they accrue more power unto themselves, right? So they're misappropriating, they're trying to usurp regal, monarchical power, autocratic power that belongs rightly to the king, who's now actually recently deceased, who's in this bed that nobody can see him except for the chief ministers. And these guys are making promulgating all sorts of rules and laws and things to give the ministers more and more power to themselves. And they try to keep this up for as long as possible. But unfortunately, it's China, and it's in the summer, and it gets warm, and it gets hot. And unfortunately, when it gets warm, it gets hot, the body begins to decompose, and it begins to smell rather disgusting and very conspicuously officious. And so the ministers, they say, well, we got to bring some fresh fish in here. We want fish for dinner tonight, right? And so the soldiers go out and they get fish, and the fish begins to rot in the sun, and so it begins to conceal the smell of Shi Huangdai. And they go through this very elaborate farce, okay? And this reminds me of the movie Weekend at Bernie's. For those of you guys who remember this movie, it was a movie that was made back in the late 80s. Perhaps you've seen it with your parents or somebody. I don't know. It's probably older than, the movie itself is older than probably all of you except for myself. It was called Weekend at Bernie's, and there's these guys that go out to this big vacation house on this nice place in the Hamptons, Virginia, or whatever. And they got this guy who's out there with them, and the guy actually ends up dying, right, when they're on this vacation. And the guys pretend that they dress the dead body up like with a Hawaiian T-shirt and some sunglasses, and they pretend that he's still alive, and they're like, raising his hand up on the beach and waving at the people. Well, that's kind of what this Shi Huang Dai business is like. It reminds me of Weekend at Bernie's, right? So it's Weekend at Bernie's, except for this guy Shi Huang Dai, except for it's not Bernie, it's this guy Shi Huang Dai. And what happens is, well, let's examine the reasons as to why you want to do this. Why would you want to go through this very elaborate, farcical misrepresentation, right? This exercise in theatricality. Why would you go through all this? What's the motivation? What's the reason? What's the rationale for this? I would say that, think about it this way: Shi Huang Dai was tyrannical. He was an autocratic, megalomaniacal, tyrannical dictator of sorts. And people were terrified of him because he ruled with an iron fist. And he was known for burying people alive, right? You know what it's like to die while you're being buried alive? I don't know what it's like. I can't say that I've actually recently been buried alive anytime soon. But I would think that it's a rather horrendous and rather horrific and rather torturous way to die. And so people are terrified of Shi Huang Dai. And the terror that people have, that basic primal human fear that they have of this guy, because he's not only was he very draconian, very severe in his measures, but he was also a very astute military commander. He was able to conquer his enemies and expand the empire and build up this great, magnificent army. And so, he's a conqueror. He's a great general. He's magnificent in terms of his achievements, but he's also very, very severe, very, very harsh, very, very merciless. And the advisors were shrewd enough to understand that if the people became aware of the fact that Shi Huang Dai was actually dead, okay, indeed, if the entourage itself became aware, but especially the people, I think they are more concerned about the riffraff, the common people. If the people became aware of the fact that this guy's now dead, might they be inclined to rebel? Might they be inclined to say, the ruler is dead. He who we feared, he who we revered, he who we were so afraid of and so terrified of, we dare not raise a fist. We dare not raise our hands because we were so terrified of him. Now he's gone. What happened when Saddam Hussein was removed from Iraq? Absolute pandemonia and chaos. What happened when Muammar Gaddafi was removed from Libya? Absolute descent into anarchy and a complete state of nature, and rivaling militias, the Sunnis and the Shias, fought each other for control of that country, and they're still battling each other right now, driving around in Toyota Hiluxes. What happens when any great, well, I shouldn't say great, but any tyrannical and terrifying ruler dies? Well, people begin to descend into the kind of behavior that is natural and most instinctual and most impulsive to them, right? The kind of behavior that legalism presupposes is innate to our human condition. So again, this is another vindication of the legalist philosophy, which is to say that without a strong tyrannical ruler to scare the hell out of everybody and to ensure that they all conform to these rules and these laws, without that, people are just going to rise up in anarchy and overthrow the rulers and do whatever the hell they damn well feel like, right? And that's exactly the point. And that's exactly what happens, all right? And so that's why these shrewd ministers try to maintain this facade for as long as they could, right? Because they knew that as soon as word was out, the game was up, okay? As soon as word got out that the Wicked Witch of the West, Shi Huang Dai, Saddam Hussein of ancient China, as soon as Saddam is dead, all right, Stalin, think about it that way, right? Stalin. But see, Stalin was replaced by a troika, a trifecta, a three-man rulership of guys who were not quite as scary as him, but when you combine all of their qualities together, they were in the aggregate cumulatively comparably scary. Okay, because one of them that was just a ridiculous, over-the-top drunkard. The other was a military man. The other guy was sort of a shrewd politician. But this is a situation whereby you don't really have somebody who's able to come in there and take up the reins and be assertive and commanding and project this presence of competence and confidence and terrify the people into submission. Okay, and so what ends up happening is you see a great deal of uprising that is endemic to the dynasty, the Qin dynasty. Revolts begin, rebellions begin all around the country, and you have two very weak emperors who try to retain some measure of control, but they're not scary and they're not terrifying and they're not as militarily competent or politically sophisticated as Shi Huangdai. And if you need it, you need the right person in the right place at the right time. And you had two people who were the wrong people for the job. You had two weak emperors, not assertive, not commanding, not charismatic, not terrifying. Above all else, right? You got to be terrifying, right? This comes down to the immortal words of Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr. in the first Iron Man movie. He says, which is better, to be feared or to be respected?" And then he turns to the generals and the high-ranking officers who are about to witness the demonstration of his new missile system in Afghanistan. He says, "I submit to you. Is it too much to ask for both?" Ha 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 ha. And then they go ahead and they blow up some Taliban guys in this mountain. But the question, I think, answers itself. Is it better to be feared or respected? In ancient China, okay, what do you think the answer is if you are living in ancient China and if you are thinking of things through the lens of the ruler? I would say it's better to be feared. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, I don't personally believe in this. I think it's actually better to be respected. Right? If you're a manager or you're trying to lead people or manage people, just inspire people to do things for you. Right? It's better to be respected. And this is sort of an aside. This is a point that's removed from what we're actually talking about. But if you really think about it philosophically, it's better to be respected because people will not do good things for you if you're feared and when you're not looking. If you're feared, they'll only do good things when they know that they're going to be held accountable for not doing those things that they should otherwise be doing, right? But if you're respected, people will do things for you even when you're not around to watch and ascertain whether or not they're actually doing those things because they respect you. And if they respect you, they want to make sure that you don't look bad, all right? And that's why they're going to do things because they have the motivation that's intrinsic to them to go do those things for you, as opposed to have to be inspired by fear and coercive force. But I think in the context of ancient China, the answer is it's better to be feared. Because if you are feared, people will also respect you. Okay? That's the point I would submit, right? Because if they fear you, they have to respect you. Because if they fail to respect you, then they're going to die, right? And that's in fact what point the fact they actually fear, right? They fear the ramifications of failing to show you proper respect and deference. Okay? And so respect, they have to respect you because to fail to respect you is to say that you got this gun pointed at your head and we can pull the trigger any second. And the second you stop respecting us, well, then the trigger is going to be pulled. It's the sword of Damocles. Okay, for those of you guys who are familiar with that story, right? There's the sword that's tied up above this guy's head. He's sitting on a throne, and he doesn't know when the sword's going to fall. It's going to fall sometime, right? But he doesn't know when it's going to fall. And there's more to the story, but it's a digression. We don't have time for that. So that was the end of the Qin the Qin dynasty, and again it fell apart so precipitously precisely because it was being held together by one man singularly unto himself. Okay, one strong, charismatic, highly effectual ruler was able to hold that all together. Right, the one man, a man of vision, but also a man of terror. Okay. Next, we have the Han government. Han, like Han Solo, like Han Solo. I don't know, for those of you who don't know how to pronounce his name. Like Harrison Ford's character from Star Wars. And before that, I've got some images here on this PowerPoint slide. So I'm between, I don't know, this is slide number 3, I guess, in the sequence of slides that we're doing tonight. But it says ancient China, as they all do. And then it's got a picture of these guys on the. I'll just come over there and show you this. I'm sorry, this is getting very tedious, guys, and I'm tired of doing this. But there, all right. So you can see what I'm talking about, right? And if I had a better command of technology, I would be doing this by technology. And I'm actually thinking about going out and getting a dry erase board from Walmart. You'll be pleased to know because I'm gonna have to draw some stuff eventually on a board. And as I said, I think we're gonna be in this for the long haul. I don't anticipate seeing you guys until, well, if you decide to take another class with me in the spring, then I'll see you then. But if you don't, then I probably won't see you again, or I'll see you at Walmart, hopefully wearing a mask. So this slide has 3 pictures. The picture on, I don't know if this is flipped when this video goes onto YouTube. I think it might be, but this picture here. So I'm not going to say if it's on your left or it's on your right because I don't know what side is what. in reference to you. That's the Terracotta Army. Okay, so that's the tomb of Shi Huangdai, and that's his 8,000. That's some of his 8,000 warriors in there. And imagine the time, and imagine how tedious and laborious an undertaking that would be to actually go through meticulously and fashion each and every one of those warriors individually. But then again, you could say, well, think about ancient Egypt, Jeff. Think about how maybe not meticulously, but how laboriously the process of assembling the pyramids was. And I would say, yeah, that actually makes Shi Huangdai look like a little punk in comparison. And then these other images really aren't very important. It's just showing that the Qin dynasty is like this red blob on the slide, and it's taking over these other dynasties. Okay, so you had these other dynasties were the remains of what I think was the Zhao. If I should look before I leap here and make sure I'm talking about the right dynasty. And I know these dynasties are very difficult to keep track of, and it doesn't really matter. Yes, it was the Zhao, right? So before the Zhao, or before the Qin, you had the Zhao, right? And what this map is supposed to demonstrate, or supposed to allow you to see, is that the Qin, also known as the Shin, right, as I keep saying, is taking over what not just the remnants of the Zhao dynasty. It's taking over that, right? But the Zhao dynasty fractured, it fragmented into various constituent, mostly semi-autonomous states. I would say mostly autonomous states. And what the Qin did, pursuant to legalistic philosophy and pursuant to sort of a proto-Machiavellian outlook on geopolitical relations, what they did is they defeated each and every one of those constituent states, not in mass, right? They didn't go against them all together cumulatively, right? They defeated them one at a time, okay? They allocated all their military resources, all their financial resources, all of the power that they had, and then they engaged with each and every one of these various constituent states that are remnants of the Zhao. They met them one at a time, okay, and they defeated them one at a time, and they did so, and they were able to achieve victory over them, and they were able to take over their populations and their territory and whatever else. So that's what happened. And then that last slide is just showing the constituent subdivisions of the Qin dynasty, which isn't very important, and which you don't really need to know anything about. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Han Empire. It was contemporaneous with, meaning it was around the same time as ancient Rome. Okay, not that that is really of any significance. It was founded by this guy by the name of Louis Li Bang or Louis Bang. I think he's got a funny name because there's a guy from I think it was Mortal Kombat who's got the same name as that. And this is actually the second time that we've got somebody in history, either a real person or sort of a deity, I guess in the other case, who looks like or sounds like, or in many ways is a simulacrum of somebody who actually shows up in Mortal Kombat. And I don't know if the guys who created Mortal Kombat were historians or what, but maybe they were, and they just had a very slick sense of humor. Because like the one person in the world who would actually get that joke would be me. But see, now I'm telling you guys, so now you can, next time you play Mortal Kombat, you can remember that. The Han government was very hierarchical, and it was structured in such a way so as to ensure that advancement was predicated on your skill and your proficiency and your capacity to effectively and diligently discharge the duties that were associated with a particular function that you had. And this is known as a meritocracy. Okay, now I can talk about aristocracy on one hand, right? Because that's how the Zhao worked. That's how the Qin slash Qin worked. And then you got the Han coming along, right? You got Han Solo that comes along, right? You got Harrison Ford comes along, and Han Solo dynasty says, no more aristocracy. Well, actually, they don't say that. They say aristocracy, but aristocracy infused with meritocracy, joined at the hip with meritocracy. And so there was this system that was sort of bifurcated, right? There were two channels, okay? Two channels to advance oneself under the auspices of the Han rule, right? One was to be born into a family of power and influence and prominence and proper political connections, right? That was one way, okay? You could be the son of a duke or the son of a count or whatever the Chinese equivalent to those various noble titles was, and you would inherit power and prestige from your father because it was patrilineal, or you could become an educated man, because this is all patriarchal, right? Women didn't really serve in the state. You go out there and you attain an education for yourself, usually a philosophical education, but not necessarily philosophical. It could be mathematical. You could be an engineer or something like that. And then you go out there and you join the state bureaucracy, and you advance through the state bureaucracy. Your advancement through the state bureaucracy is predicated upon how effectively you are able to do the job that you currently occupy. And there are tests, there are actually examinations that the Han dynasty implements and imposes upon candidates for advancement within the context of the state bureaucracy. And so if you are a candidate aspiring for the next echelon, the next highest clerkship or bureaucratic functionary position above you, right? What you have to do is you have to go out there and to take this test. You have to sit for this test, and you have to achieve satisfactory results on this test, which demonstrate your proficiency at doing not just what you're supposed to do, but also your understanding and your competency with respect to the things that you ought to aspire to do, right? And what this does is ensures that the people who are selected for promotion and elevation and advancement through the various hierarchical echelons of the state are people who actually know what they're doing, right? This is, you could say that it's ironic in the sense that you have these two systems and they're kind of antithetical to each other, right? Advancement in aristocracy is in no way a function of or a corollary of your skills or your competence or your professionalism or your aptitude or your experience or anything else that really matters, right? It's all about who you know, okay, or who your father was. Whereas meritocracy, it's not about who your father was. It shouldn't really be even about who you know, right? It's about what you know. The focus is on what you know, okay? And what do they say? In life, in the world, right? In whatever business you end up going in, right? It's not who you know, it's what you know. It's no. I'd say no. What am I saying? It's not what you know, it's who you know. Okay. In meritocratic systems, the formulation is, or it should be, and I think it actually is. They say it is not who you know, it's what you know. Okay. In a meritocratic system, right? Because everything is predicated on merit, and merit means competence and skill and experience and the ability to properly function in a particular job, right? So it is about what you know. Now, again, unfortunately, that is not the case in our life. And you look at the way that the Han structured this bureaucracy, the Han dynasty, Han Solo, and it's interesting because what they're doing essentially is they're implementing civil service exams, right? I mean, we can call them whatever we want, but I refer to them as civil service exams. Now, if you go into law enforcement, or if you go and work for the state bureaucracy, the state of Michigan, or the state of Illinois, or whatever state, right? You will advance through the various echelons of that particular system based on civil service exams, right? So you got to take an exam, and it tests, ostensibly, it measures your proficiency at doing the job that you're doing right now, and it also assesses whether or not you understand the job above you. Now, despite that, when you go to the Secretary of State and you go to get your license renewed, or you go to get whatever you're doing as Secretary of State, I don't know what you're doing, right? Maybe this isn't true in Houghton County, but it's certainly true in Oakland County, and Wayne County, and Macomb County, and Livingston, and Genesee, and all the counties down here. You would never see a less efficient bureaucracy than when you go to the Michigan Secretary of State, and people who care less about actually servicing the interests of the clients. So the problem with the modern state bureaucracy is too much is predicated upon longevity of service, and not so much is comprehended by how skilled you are at actually doing the thing you should be doing. So a strict meritocracy is a good thing, and we should have more of them, but unfortunately we don't. Now, the other thing about the other aspect of the Han government is that the emperor was the head of the state. He was the head of the state, and he was the commander in chief of the army. Now, theoretically, okay, in theory, the emperor was supposed to consult with and confer with his chief advisors. The advisors were, in theory, supposed to come in there and sit down and give him advice and counsel, right? The advice and counsel of the Senate, right? The president appoints presidential appointees, whether they're members of the executive branch or the judiciary, with the advice and consent of the Senate. Well, that's kind of how the emperor was supposed to act in accordance with the way in which the Han government was structured. So the emperor was supposed to, again, in theory, was supposed to sit down in his royal chambers, in his throne room, wherever he was, And he was supposed to sit there with his chief advisors and go back and forth and engage dialectically and discuss whether or not this was a good idea to invade these people or to appoint this guy to a high position, whatever it was, right? And discuss the various merits and the demerits of this particular proposition. Now, in fact, okay, in fact, the Han emperors practiced what is known as Oriental despotism. Oriental despotism, okay? The word despotism, the underlying word there is despot, okay? What does it mean to be a despot? It means, well, it has a very negative, sort of nefarious connotation in modern day vernacular, but it just means somebody who rules in an arbitrary fashion, an unrestrained fashion. They can just go out there and do whatever they want in a very capricious way. It means that you're not restricted in any way. You can go out there and you can make decrees up as you just go along, right? So there's a difference in terms of how the Han government operates theoretically and how they actually operate. Now you would say, well, why is that? Why bother going through that pretense of sitting down and consulting and listening to the advice and consent of your ministers and all that, right? If in actuality it's just a matter of doing what the king really wants to do, whatever the king feels like doing, or the emperor feels like doing, right? We're just going to do whatever that the impulse of the moment. Well, I would say this is a way to sort of sanitize an otherwise very totalitarian, very autocratic form of rule. By creating this false pretense, if you will, of the advisements of the chief ministers coming into the calculus and having some determinative influence on the outcome of the decision-making process. If people really believe that, okay, whether or not that's actually true, it doesn't matter. It's what the people believe. Now, if the people actually believe that the emperor, the great magisterial emperor who is answerable and accountable only to the gods, if he sits down and actually has a proper discussion with his ministers, and they, in their conversations, they decide to formulate a plan of action which they all concur upon and which seems to be driven by logic and sort of rational calculus. Well, then, don't you think that the people would be more inclined to go along with whatever law or rule or policy is being promulgated or implemented by the empire, as opposed to saying, well, this is just the capricious, arbitrary whim and will of an Oriental despot, right? Well, you'd have to presuppose that that despot is the most sagacious and wise and knowledgeable and intelligent and philosophical individual in the world to say, well, yeah, let's just go along with whatever he says, right? So I think that this notion of this theoretical consultation, right, that in theory the king, the emperor, should sit down, should consult, should engage with, should listen to, should conform to the recommendations and the advisements of his chief ministers. That sanitizes this process. It lends an air of legitimacy to that which otherwise might be lacking in credibility, because people are otherwise going to say, insinuate, well, yeah, what does that guy know what he's doing? He's just the emperor, he's just the king, right? Maybe he doesn't really know anything, okay? But if you have ministers that are guiding the king and recommending a certain course of action to the king, and these ministers, by the way, mind you, this is very important, are a product of a system which emphasizes and accentuates the significance of merit. So everybody in the state bureaucracy, all the way up to the ministers, not the king himself because he was a product of the aristocracy, but the ministers would be a product of the meritocratic system, right? So they would have advanced that position of high rank in the state by virtue of their competence and their intellect and their skill at doing whatever it is they're supposed to be doing within the context of the state bureaucracy. So I think that you could say that too, in and of itself, the fact that this is a meritocratic state and you wouldn't have advanced that far in that state, but for the fact that you were very good at doing your job, that lends credibility to the idea that the government is acting on the most prudent and pragmatic advice possible, as opposed to just doing whatever the king feels like it, right? But in actuality, behind the scenes, that's pretty much what they're doing, right? The king just says, I feel like invading these people, or I feel like doing this, that, or the other thing, and the government does that, all right? But it's got this air of legitimacy to it by virtue of this theoretical construct, whereby the emperor is supposed to at least take into consideration the advisements of his ministers. You had three chief ministers, a chancellor who was responsible for finance, the bureaucracy, which is all the subordinate echelons within the state, and the judiciary. Okay, so he's sort of like it's like a super cabinet member. All right, we have cabinet members in the United States federal government, executive branch, and you have a cabinet member, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, Department of the Army, Department of the Navy, Department of Agriculture and Energy, et cetera, right? Well, you got this. These are essentially the the three most important executive functionaries of the Han government, and they have control over various constituent departments. Which, if in fact they were in the United States government, these constituent departments would have their own cabinet member associated with them, right? So you have this guy again. I said, what was he called? The chancellor, right? Finance, bureaucracy, and the judiciary, right? So you'd have the secretary of commerce, or the treasury department, and you'd have the bureaucracy, chief of White House chief of staff, and then you'd have I don't know, the attorney general under him. Now, so chancellor is one significant minister. The other minister is known as the counselor. He's responsible for appointing and promoting government officials and superintending all building projects that the Han Empire embarks upon. So the chancellor, the counselor, and then the marshal. The marshal is the chief commanding general of the army. And then beneath these three chief ministers, you have 9 subordinate ministers, 9 ancillary ministers, lower echelon ministers. And these 9 ancillary or subordinate ministers are actually responsible for mostly maintaining the personal household of the emperor himself, right? And this is kind of an interesting concept, right? So they're more like Ivanka Trump or Jared Trump or Jared, whatever his name is, Jared Kushner. The personal family, right? Or they're not the personal family of the emperor, but they're responsible for managing the personal affairs of the emperor. Okay, so like a personal chief of staff, or a personal valet, or a personal chamberlain, or a personal, whatever they are, right? But they have the rank of minister because they're very important because of their association with the emperor. Um, I don't think that I'm going to have time to finish this, and I wanted to try to keep this under an hour and a half. And the presidential debate has already been going on for 45 minutes, so I missed the best part. So I'm just going to go ahead and sign off right now, and I'm going to thank you for listening and for watching, hopefully, and for hopefully not being asleep yet. And I don't know when I'll see you guys next, but we're going to try to keep this going as long as we can. And remember this, I think I prefaced all this by saying in the beginning that this is Monday's lecture, is what this is, or what this was, is supposed to be Monday's lecture. All right. So hopefully you didn't get through all this expecting to learn a lot about the stuff that's going to be on the test that is due this Thursday, because you didn't learn anything that actually relates to that test. You learned stuff that's going to relate to the next test, right? When that eventually transpires, which is probably going to be the end of October, regardless of whether or not we're back. I wish you all luck this week, although that really doesn't matter because you're probably not going to be listening to this until after it's all said and done. And I do, regardless of when you listen to this, I do hope and very much wish that you be safe, and you stay safe, and you stay healthy, and you be very careful around people who are out there in public. So be careful, and be healthy and stay well. And thanks for listening.